based on what all's going on today in the world. I had 3 kids. I owned a company. I was very athletic. So fortunately for me, I hit the skids for a few days, like really knew something was way wrong, but I was able to bounce back. And then I had about 10 years later, I had a very traumatic experience. Actually, it's like 15 years later, I had a very traumatic experience losing my mother, and I was living in an old beach house full of mold and didn't know it. And yeah, so that's when the Lyme really kicked in, because your immune system can handle certain things for a certain amount of period, but it's when it gets double stacked, right? So the people I talk to, normally the first thing I ask is, okay, have you, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And so I say, have you ever had a bite? It doesn't have to be a tick. Have you ever had some kind of a bug bite, infection, something? I ask if they've ever gone through a traumatic experience. I ask, are you living in a clean environment? And what's interesting is most people are like, yeah, I live in a brand new house. Well, let me tell you, the way houses are built these days, just because it's a brand new house doesn't mean it's a clean brand new house, right? So that is, it can be behind the bathroom tile. You never quite are sure maybe where it could be, but especially if you're living in an area where they've done a lot of development, and so they kind of go in and put in the slab, and then next thing you see, walls are going up, and especially if they're building a community, they're trying to cut costs by doing everything in a group, and so the walls go up, and then the roof kind of, not the full roof, just the boards go up for this roof, and then they add all the things. So you don't know how damp that wood is. So there's a lot of different variations, obviously. But my immune systems just really started crashing when we found the mold in our house. And I should have known it was in my house, but because I grew up in Florida, but I never thought about it. And, because I grew up in Florida, but my middle son had multiple sinus infections, and the mold was actually right in the area where my kids played, in the house. So, they're like telltale signs. I just didn't realize that the multiple sinus infections he had at 4, 5, and 6 years old were due to mold.
Yeah.
To it. So, there's a lot of those things that once you start understanding different issues and what is good for your body and not good for your body, those are the kind of things that I try to talk about in my book, so people can say, oh, I got that, or I get that, or I have that problem, or you know what I mean? So I kind of going through it in little marker ways so people can check the box, so to speak.
That's awesome. That's amazing, because so you figured, looking back then, that you got the Lyme from that spider bite, but you didn't know it was Lyme until much later, after you had your mold exposure, then started connecting the dots and being like, oh, wait a minute,
Yeah. So people don't get it. And in the beginning of my book, I dedicate it to my mom, my dad, and my sister, all of whom had passed. And I did it because I didn't understand that my mom kept getting pneumonia because of that we had mold in our attic growing up. And back then, kids, we played outside, right? I mean, it wasn't an inside lifestyle, it was an outside lifestyle. So I was always outside. So the area of the house where we had mold growing up didn't affect me that I knew about. But it definitely affected my mother, because she constantly had pneumonia, or if she was at the beach out in the fresh air, it would clear up, but then she would go back in the house and, her lungs would be infected again. So like I said, there's all these different telltale signs that you learn about. And that's why I dedicated the book to my sister and my mom and dad, because there's so many things I learned after their passing that if I had known when they were alive, I would have said, oh, let's do this. Let's change this, not only beef up your immune system, but be aware. Just be aware
Yeah,
of your surroundings, right?
absolutely. Well, and I know the thing that can be tricky with mold is sometimes you can become aware of it. You can actually even see it. You can find it. It's physically there. But sometimes you can't. So sometimes you even have to go get a professional to help you find it or figure out where it's at and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And in Florida, we have a law that states you cannot have the same tester as remediator. So the team that comes in to remediate and take the mold out of your house cannot be the testing, which I think is such a smart way to handle it, because then you can't, it's the chance of being scammed is slimmer. Let's say that, by
Yeah.
having two independent corporations, you're dealing with one that's just specifically testing, gives you the test results, what kind of mold you've got, what areas of the house it's in. Then you bring them remediation company to come in and do it. And you may find more, but I'm just saying, it's people can sadly taking advantage of otherwise.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. So let's say somebody suspects that, okay, maybe Lyme might be an issue. Maybe they've either found mold or maybe they've even already gone and had their place tested and they know there's mold. What would be like the very first thing that you recommend someone does? Because obviously people can easily get overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, what do I do with this?
Yeah, well, you're right. It is overwhelming, because when you typically, before you get the actual Lyme diagnosis, you get Epstein-Barr, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, meningitis. You get all these things, and it's so frightening because it's just overwhelming. The information is absolutely overwhelming. Instead of saying, hey, let's boost our immune systems, let's start juicing, let's not be in EMF fields all the time, don't hang out near your modem, get fresh air, do the best that you can to boost your own immune system as you're going through the difficulty of being diagnosed. So, my suggestion is, if you think you're living in mold, then try to remove yourself from it, stay with a friend, do something that you can do to change your environment, and while you're trying to figure it out. And the other thing is, like I said, do whatever you can do to boost your immune system in the meantime. Eat healthy, exercise, get an attitude of gratitude. Like, that's really tough because you get so bogged down.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. So with your story, let's look a little bit at this. So you were living in that house then that had all that mold. Did you have to actually move, or how did you handle it?
Oh my gosh, we all had to move out, and half of my house was demolished where they found the mold, and had to be rebuilt. And I was blessed that we were able to move out, not knowing what was going on. And when they first found the black mold, it was in the very depths of a closet. And my daughter was wanting to play dress up and said, Mommy, can I play dress up? And I was like, sure. And, she moved the clothes back, and there's black mold, which started answering a lot of questions. But and like I said, the Lyme probably would have never kicked in its severity that it did if I hadn't had to deal with the mold, because my immune system could have probably tackled at least that. Or if I didn't have Lyme, maybe my immune system could have handled the mold, because obviously I had been exposed to the mold, but it hadn't, taken me down because I wasn't exposed to it day in and day out all day.
Yeah,
So I was outside and active.
absolutely, for sure. So did your daughter have issues then too, because she'd been in that closet and had the black mold?
She had some issues, but again, my kids still played outside a lot too, so I was fortunate, and my oldest son had some issues, but it was my middle son that had like this infection, the sinus infections, all that kind of stuff. So, definitely he was more sensitive to it than the other two, so we're all different, right? Even if we have the same parents, you get different genetics through, obviously your parents. So my middle son definitely was more affected by it than the other two, but we were able, to there. And what's so cool today is that they're all very health conscious. They're all very much about diet and exercising, keeping your immune system up. They've learned through this process of how to be as young adults and how to carry on in their life and, move into their futures, having had this experience as young children.
That's awesome. That's great. So you move out, and then what? Did you get a Lyme diagnosis as well right away, or what did you do? What was the next part of your...
I actually got the Lyme diagnosis at the same time we found the mold. It was great.
Wow.
Yeah. Like I said, it was stack negative news on stack negative news on stack negative news. And I was like, I've got to operate. I have these 3 children. I have a husband, I have business. I'm like, I need to, how am I going to beat all this stuff? Right. And it's overwhelming because you can't, you try so hard not to absolutely crash. Right. Because we want to be there for yourself and for your family. And you're trying to just figure it out as you go.
For sure, absolutely. So then what did you do next? Did you find like a naturopathic doctor or functional medicine doctor, or how did you start beginning that journey to healing? I started
at the time, Florida there wasn't really a specialty doctor that dealt with it at the time in the state of Florida. So I started having to, I would learn at the time that, there was a doctor that specialized in it, and I would go find the doctor and try to get in to see them, and that they weren't necessarily in the state of Florida. And you have to remember this, that at the time we didn't have like internet. I know I don't want to sound like I'm ancient, but we didn't have the ability to do this, right? Having the ability to Google something and look it up makes you have the ability to be so far advanced versus you're trying to write down your symptoms and talk to doctors over the telephone, and explain, I feel buzzing, I feel this, you're trying to explain the feeling for them to say, okay, I think I can help you, come see me, trying to explain your symptoms to a nurse or somebody that they say, oh yeah, we've heard of that. Come on in. I think we can give you help. So, I did that whole thing. I had 2 ports, one on one side, and then at 5 years it died. I had to have it removed, and I got another port on the other side because I did the whole antibiotic route, and I started finding that the antibiotics just kind of ruined my gut. So that wasn't helping me, but that was the only choice back then. As far as I knew, I wasn't knowledgeable about doing, herbs and Chinese medicine and getting acupuncture and doing all the things, that are available today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. We are blessed with all the technology because not only, we have Google, we have social media, we can connect with people, we have podcasts like this one and other ones where we can do things. There's a lot more books that have been written about that kind of stuff. So, we have a lot more support and ways to help get that information outside of a doctor's office that, yeah, you're right. Back then, and what else were you going to do?
Yeah. And, when we don't know that sometimes how our stress or traumas or however we deal with certain aspects of life, we don't know how hard that hits our immune system sometimes. Mm-hmm. So when I'm talking to somebody and I say, have you ever had a really traumatic experience? It's interesting that phone typically goes silent, or the look of perplex comes over them and they go, well, yeah. What does that have to do with it? And I said, well, we don't know how stress or an event can, hit us harder than we think. We think, oh, we can just deal with it and it's kind of gone. But we're not quite sure it's fully out of our system, if you know what I mean.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. I do know what you mean. Yeah, the stress, the trauma, all that stuff. I mean, it definitely plays a role. Like, I know I personally had something that happened to me about 4 years before I got my Hashimoto's diagnosis, and that was potentially part of it. I also discovered I had mercury toxicity issues that I had to deal with, and I know you've dealt with that too. So
Yeah. Mine came from my fillings being taken out incorrectly. I was worried I had 7 mercury fillings, and I asked the dentist that I was seeing at the time, do you know how to do this correctly? And he said, oh yeah, I do. And he didn't. So
yeah, no, most of the dentists don't. No, mine actually came from a filling that had started leaking, and I had a naturopathic doctor tell me that they could tell it was leaking. And I actually went to a natural holistic dentist that actually I mean, this was even before COVID, but they looked like they were dressing up like embalm, covered with everything and with ozone and all of the proper ways to remove it. So no, I didn't come from getting it removed, but I had it because it was cracking, and there were 2 different teeth actually, and one of them he was able to get out the mercury filling and then replace it with the regular white filling. The other tooth had to be pulled, but fortunately it's all the way at the back of my mouth, so I've never, I just don't have tooth back there, so
yeah, because that's a tricky one, for sure. Like you said, you feel like you're in outer space and they're wearing all the suits, and and that is the proper way to remove it, to protect them. If they're protecting them, if they're going to that extent, they know what they're doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because the dentist that doesn't know what they're doing, they just remove it like a regular thing, and they don't know what they're doing if they're doing that. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so sometimes when the person looks the most outlandish, they're the most effective people because they get it, so whether they're wearing grounding tools or it's just always, if I walk into an office to meet with somebody and they've got different types of protection throughout their office, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I know they're kind of on the same page with me, right? If all of a sudden they've got amethyst, or they've got,
they're using essential oils, and they've got grounding and all different things like that. It's
yeah. But it's interesting, and as I said, I live near Mayo Clinic, and so I had people talk to me about different things that they're dealing with in different ways Mayo's treating them, and it just totally, I'm going, have you tried juicing? Have you tried celery juice? Have you tried this? Have you tried that? Versus getting low dose chemo, or, it's just interesting to hear how people are treated for rheumatoid arthritis when it could be caused by something completely different.
Absolutely, for sure. Yeah, and there actually is an interview on this podcast from last year, I believe, so it's a little old, but with an actual rheumatoid arthritis MD who actually got Lyme and a few other things, and she talks about how she incorporates alternative stuff into her practice. So anybody that's got that, it's a really good episode to listen to. But yeah, it's absolutely, that's a whole nother can of worms in and of itself there. So let's fast forward then a little bit as we're kind of coming towards the end of our time here. And you have pretty much, I would assume, more or less on the healing journey for most things. And then of course, COVID hits and you get COVID. And then what happened?
So when I got COVID the first time, I thought, oh my God, the way my body felt, I thought, oh no, the Lyme disease is back. My joints hurt. I was very disoriented. I felt like the room was spinning, and I literally was going, that fear factor jumps back in you. Not, oh God, this is COVID, before COVID was identified, because I didn't know that. It was definitely one of those situations that I got COVID because before COVID was identified as COVID. So thank God at the time I did have a naturopath doctor, and I called her and I said, this is what's going on. This is what's happening with my lungs. This is what's happening with my head, blah, blah, blah. She said, you need to get to an ER, and you need to get a x-ray done on your lungs. And this is what I think you've got. And I went to literally, an emergency center, and they checked me, and I said, would you mind here I am in an emergency center, and I'm like, do you mind talking to my doctor? And, I thought she'd be like, no, I'm not. And the doctor said, yeah, absolutely, I will. And at that time, my doctor said, go on the steroids, go on the antibiotics. You need to hit this hard. And we're going to then detox you from anything. And we're going to detox you while, but you need to get all that in your system. And it was very interesting to have that happen, and then I was doing the IVs of all the, everything from vitamin C and glutathione to B12s. So I still keep those arsenals in my, handy, like probably everybody else, you're just have a huge arsenal of things, but glutathione is definitely a ticket to healing for a lot of issues. I'll say that.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Glutathione's a big one, and yeah, I mean, and like you said, I mean, even though you're mostly healed today, that doesn't mean you can just fall off the bandwagon and not take care of your health,
Yeah. Yeah, so I still do, I do self-magnet therapy. I know where I need to put things if I get a sore throat or if I'm, feeling a little bit congested. I've just learned through the years of how to balance your body so your body can fight it. And if I am doing that and it's not working, I add glutathione into the punch. Couple of days I might give myself a B12 shot. I mean, it just all depends on kind of what I'm dealing with. Or recently my husband got a third round of COVID and I was just like, all right, buddy, we're getting rid of this. Between ivermectin to, glutathione shots, I was like, we're going to get rid of this however we can, and using every tool that we have, I'm big into infrared saunas. I believe in cold plunges, all of these things that we can do to keep our immune system built up. Obviously we can't be doing some of that while you're sick, but let's try to keep the toxins out while we can, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I actually have a personal infrared sauna in my bedroom. I got about a year and a half ago. I'm a big fan of infrared saunas, infrared light. They've been amazing.
It is. I'll tell you, if I end up doing a sequel, which I'm talking right now with a group that are interested in doing a sequel, that I would bring in the whole light therapy and add so much more alternative ways to heal, to help people just keep their immune up and running. Like you said, I mean, that red light, that sauna I bought 15 years ago, I did exactly like you did. I had it in my bedroom. I would try to roll out of bed in the morning and I would do an infrared sauna. And at the end of the day, I would finish it with an Epsom salt bath.
It's another good thing.
Juice, put the good stuff in, get the bad stuff out, and just try to keep on it because we need it due to our environment. And you try to eat healthy, and I have a tower garden, so I try to grow my vegetables for juicing. So it's, there's so many ways that you can go about tackling it. And the ticket is just getting educated enough to understand, okay, this is how I keep my immune system up.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So everybody, so we will include the link to her website. We'll include the link to your book, Silent Killers, so people can go and find that book.
Yeah.
And the last question I always like to ask everybody is, if you could go back in time. So for you, I think it's been about 26 years or so since things first started your down spiral. What would you tell yourself today that you know now that you really wish you had known back then?
I really would have stood up for myself. I wouldn't have let doctors, treat me like I was crazy. And I would have stood up for myself. I would have said, I feel this and it feels like this. And it, you know what I mean? And I would have been more of a self-advocate. And I would have stood up and not just taken a diagnosis. I'd be like, okay, what's the root of that? What the root is keeping your immune system as built up as you possibly can. So that's the first thing I would do. I would go back and start just, doing anything I could do to support my immune system till I could figure out what my next step would be. And I wouldn't have taken all the antibiotic, all the IV antibiotics, there's so many things I would have gone back and done differently. But the number one thing is keeping control of your immune system. So if something does sideways, you can head it off at the path or not get it at all. And men and women, especially as you get older, and so many people are dealing with COVID and whatnot, I would definitely keep an eye on your hormones because that is the essential element to a healthy body.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So anything else you want to share? I know that you also have some kind of a community that people can join at some point. Ideally, they're going to read your book first, and then tell us a little bit about that.
So you can follow us on most social media realms. It's Silent Killers Project. We have a Silent Killers community. So we just, get together, people bring in new ideas, things of way they found to help themselves heal, or, just try to support one another, because love is the ultimate healer. And if we can stay together as a community and be like, atta girl, atta boy, like, we got this, you don't feel lonely going through the process.
Awesome. That's great. You don't feel lonely going through the process. That's a great tagline to end it. So thanks so much, Jennifer, for sharing.
Thank you.
We'll have links below. So the episodes, make sure that you check those out. Thanks for listening to this episode of Autoimmune Rehab. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with anybody else you feel like could benefit. Please follow and subscribe, and leave us a review or send us some comments if you feel like doing that as well. Again, thanks for listening, and we will share with you next week on another episode of the Autoimmune Rehab Podcast.
Thanks so much.